Werewolf here. Valentine's Day is approaching, and it falls upon a weekend this year. And this is the perfect opportunity for single men, given the era of social isolation and anxiety that many of us dwell in, for men to capitalize on this day, especially since a lot of other guys are not approaching women anymore for falling to social media and dating sites. It'll be a lot easier for you to tell which women are single if you go out somewhere. Later in this video, I'm going to get into ideas on how to conquer your approach anxiety. But first, if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I take a bite out of these manosphere, MGTOW, red pill frauds. You know, the ones that tell you modern dating doesn't work, or don't even approach women because you'll get Me Too'd, accused of sexual harassment. You see, these Pied Pipers on the internet are taking advantage of particularly young men with limited or even no experience with women and dating, and they show you a handful of narcissistic women on TikTok, Me Too'ing guys over holding the door for them, and they tell you that this represents the typical woman these days and to stay away. And then they cite these bleak statistics based on dating sites, failing to mention things like women outnumber guys 75%, or no, guys outnumber women 75% on these dating sites, so the statistics are not going to reflect the real world, and then they keep repeating this mantra, don't approach women unless you have looks, money, and status. Well, I know a lot of guys that do pretty well without those things in the real world, but these influencers are pushing this distorted worldview upon you. Look, I've seen so many examples to the contrary, and I've lived a handful myself. I'm going to tell you about those. So, here are a few ideas to get started, particularly if you consider yourself an introvert or don't get out much for whatever reason. Let's start with some places that you could go. Obviously, a bar is what most people think of if you're feeling it. Of course, I always felt like I need subtitles to understand what other people are saying to me at a bar. Well, how about a coffee shop? You could bring a book, maybe a book for the business that you're working on, or a notebook or a journal, do some drawing, bring a novel that might be a good conversation topic starter. So even if you don't see any women that look approachable, you're still putting that time to good use. You could go to a Barnes & Noble type place that has a cafe. You could go to a jazz club like your Tom Cruise in Collateral. A pet store, cat women flock to those places. A supermarket, a woman buying 15 items, that's not a lot, is probably single, as opposed to a woman buying well over 30 items to support a family or a guy that she lives with. It's a lot easier to tell when you're at a supermarket, a Target, a Walmart kind of place, to know who to go up and talk to. Look, you could go to a dance place. If you only have to be kind of okay these days at dancing to capitalize on that, because dancing becomes the conversation. Look, the last one of those places I went to, it was the opposite of what you see in like a movie. It was more like 50 dudes with baseball hats standing around the bar acting like they're cool, and mostly women on the dance floor. So if you're one of the few guys up there, if you get towards the middle and you act like you're having fun, you have a good chance that something will happen. It was sort of the inversion of what they say in the movie, the whole wallflower thing. Now, onto some ideas for approach anxiety. It's all in your mind, so why not try a different framing device? Let's start with the language that you use, something that you feel confident with. I got the idea when one time I was at a restaurant with a friend. The waitress was clearly flirting with her beyond what most waitresses do for tips. He thought she was interested in him, so at the end of the evening, he had an unusual way of asking her out that really stood out. He said to her, I bet a lot of guys ask you for your number, but I want to be one of those guys. And he got her number. I thought that was interesting. It wasn't exactly me, but again, find some wording or phrasing that's you, that sounds natural to you, that's going to distinguish yourself from the many other guys that might or might not have asked her. One time I was going to ask a girl in a class in college that I was in, this is different because I knew her, for some time. I knew what her sense of humor was like, and towards the last minute, I thought of a joke for when I asked her. That would kind of become like a coda in music for the end of the conversation, no matter how it went, yes or no. Well, she essentially said no, but then I told the joke, and we both laughed at that, and then months later we ended up hanging out a few times, but never really went anywhere. One girl I danced with at a nightclub early on into my dating experience, I kissed her on the hand at the end of the evening because most guys don't do that, and for me that was a fun way of standing out and being unique. Once I was at a bar, and I overheard a frat guy, he looked like he could have been the quarterback on the team, talking to a girl, and then, he asks her, "Do you have a boyfriend?" And she says, yes, she does. He pauses, he says, "Well, boyfriends are gay." I thought that was so funny. Again, that worked for him and his persona. I couldn't have pulled that off. So, again, if you can think of some ways to express yourself through language that feels right to you, you can use that. Again, sometimes the introvert, in the end, does better than the extrovert because they actively study people and the way that they are, and they take time to think things through. I got this tip from a girl that I liked her idea because, again, my interest in language and literacy, again, that's not everyone. But she said, go up to a girl and say, you're talking to her, "I'd love to take you to coffee if you're available." If you're available has two meanings, and I like that. I saw another independent film. It's called Drivers Wanted. Guy asks girl out, he doesn't do a great job. She says no. He turns around and says, "Man, I am so bad at these things." And I thought that was so funny, just a good way to withdraw. Now, for a psychological framing device, let's say you're uncomfortable at a bar or wherever you go, but think of a zone where you feel comfortable. Maybe it's your living room, maybe it's a club or a group meeting place that you attend, and then imagine that this place that you're going to is an extension of that place. One time I even, at this job that I had, pretended I was the company president, and it even affected the way that I walked through the aisles of the work. Maybe you pretend you're in your mind that you're the owner of the bar, and these are your patrons or guests. You want to make sure they're having a good night and a good time. Again, if that feels right to you, do that. If it doesn't, don't try it. Just make sure it represents you and what you're striving to be. I'm borrowing from the pickup artists. Most of those guys are fake and just selling books and shows, right? But they had a few good ideas, like peacock theory, where you wear something that stands out. Now, I try to wear a conversation topic that represents me, something to keep things going, but don't be fake about it. Like some of the peacock artists were saying, get your fingernails painted black or something. To me, that's just nonsense and just too fake. A lot of people can see through that. Now, what if you don't have a friend group to go with, or you don't have a wingman, or you don't have a wing woman? Sometimes wing women are the best for attracting women at these places. Just go as yourself. Don't overthink it. I saw this one guy's video on YouTube. He had a good idea. I wish I could remember his name or his channel number. I'll try to find it. He said, if in the unlikely event a girl asks you, "Where are your friends?" you could say with enthusiasm, they're at home, they're at their dorm or wherever, but I'm so glad that I came out here tonight. I like that. That's honest, and that's a good way of overcoming the, why are you here alone? Think about that. Your friends are rotting away, decaying, living vicariously, playing video games or whatever. You're out somewhere, you're taking chances. There's this one girl I met at a class that I was in back at college. There was some other guy, and a few of her friends that were girls all hovered around that guy. It was difficult to tell the nature of the relationship. When I asked her out at the end, she said, predictably, I'm busy, it's bad timing. So, on the very last day, I ran into her at the cafeteria where everyone would go after class, I said, good luck with your final projects. And one more thing, you are an extremely beautiful woman, and I hope someone tells you that every day. It was hard to read her reaction. She faintly smiled a little bit. I turned and walked away, and that was the last time our paths ever crossed. I was so glad I said that. It gave me confidence for the next girl. that I went to. But look, it took a lot of failures for me to get kind of good at this, and I still had a lot of failures since. But don't listen to these MGTOW, red pill manosphere frauds that are telling you, it's over, you're gonna get Me Too'd. There are a lot of times where it didn't affect me. I've even asked girls out at work, and in fact, one girl, this one job I had, said she respected me for asking her. So, again, do what's right for you. Don't be afraid to take calculated risks. And until next time, life, liberty, and the pursuit of...